Judd Hempel, I don't know if you know Judd, he's a seed grower in Easton, a neighbor of ours, and I admire. Judd's dad farmed on basic land. Maybe Judd's picked up a little more land, but it basically stayed the same size. He's probably making a decent living and putting money away every year and have a decent retirement when he's done, and does it very modestly. And I think, boy, you know, that would be good. That would be good to do that. To be able to maintain and just stay where you are within the confines that you have, and produce what you're producing for the market that you're doing, and just work on becoming more and more efficient at that, but then all of a sudden a Frito-Lay will come in and they'll need a little more product, or there's a chance to get into that business, so we go into that, and I think an operation this size, if you aren't growing at a certain rate, then you're dying at a certain rate.
Many of the apple growers that are left in Maine and northern New England have got fairly successful retail operations, and the advice I've had from them for the last 10 years, and some of them have heeded, and probably most would admit that they got it from me, but is that they've got 10 or 15 acres that they sell retail and pick your own, that they're making their living off, and then the other 50 acres that they have that they sell wholesale, they're losing their living off. And if they would keep their 10 or 15 acres, they could make more money and have half the year that they're working 30 or 40 hours a week on the farm, which is very part-time basis when it comes to agriculture, and take care of it themselves and have very few employees except for in the fall during harvest. And we very much enjoy our employees, but they are expensive. And given the profit situation, not having employees sounds good. But anyhow, I think that with the exception of 3 or 4 farms in New England, that the rest who have competed and grown and been a little more efficient maybe and expanded in order to meet their markets, that the other several thousand orchard operations should really concentrate on that retail market, take advantage of all the people that live in New England. I mean, we're on the outer fringe up here in central Maine. Most of New England has more people to draw from than we do, and even in this area, a few 10-acre operations that are mostly retail would do, that are all retail, would do better financially than a 100-acre operation that was wholesale.
Designing and operating cropping and livestock production systems. Sustainable agriculture production systems are more integrated than industrial agriculture systems. Livestock feed is produced on the farm. Intensive rotational grazing is prevalent. Cover crops provide much of the farm's plant nutrients. Livestock is integrated into the cropping system. Crop rotations and IPM techniques reduce pesticide use. Weeds are mechanically managed. Season extension techniques add to farm viability.
We use a practice here called intensive rotational grazing. You wouldn't know it by this year with all the grass that we've had with all the rain. But essentially we divide up our big pastures into smaller paddocks so that we can get the cattle to graze evenly through the whole pasture and utilize all the grass better. And also deposit the manure in a more spread out area. Rather than just right by the trees or right by the watering hole. And so we're forcing the cattle to utilize and getting more production out of the land as well. And so that's one thing. And then just utilizing the cattle, you know, essentially we sell grass here and we're utilizing the cattle to do that. And so they're producing manure and then we spread the manure right back onto the grass again, and that's the complete cycle.
And put them out.
We don't have a very good rotational grazing system in comparison to instance for Mark and Vicki Russell, who do a rotational system where they move the cows more than once or twice a day, as far as my understanding goes. You have to have a land base that will, to use the word sustainability, to sustain that by having enough acreage for the cows that you're feeding so that they have fresh, lush grass daily so that their milk production stays up, particularly if you are relying on rotational grazing in the summer as a way to feed your livestock.
I choose to graze the sheep and the cattle together because they have different grazing habits, and you can get more complete forage utilization on a piece of land with the more different kinds of livestock that you have on it. And I guess my wildlife background tells me that, because the most productive grazing land in the whole world is the Serengeti Plain in Africa, where there's 20 or 30 different species all grazing together. And you probably should have, I've got 2, but that's better than 1, but you probably should have, 6 or 8 if you want to be diverse.
Most of the herds in the state of Maine or in the United States today are either semi-confinement or total confinement, where the cows are brought their feed, they're on cement, they go to a feed bunk, they don't go out in the pasture and forage. Our cows, totally opposite. They go in to the barn twice a day to be milked and are in the barn very little, even in the winter. We prefer to have them out on the ground. It lowers our culling rate, lowers our veterinary bill, and I think the hybrids just will have a lower maintenance cost all the way around. They're smaller cattle. It's modeled after the New Zealanders. They think we're absolutely nuts for having 1,800-pound Holstein cows that we feed grain to. They'd much rather have a 900-pound cow that they get 10,000 pounds of milk out of and doesn't know what a grain scoop is.
The quality on the stand was suffering because we were loath, after all this hard work, to throw anything out. And so the stand would get a little shabby looking, and so finally we decided to get a couple pigs and we would high grade the stand. In other words, keep everything just top notch, and whatever wasn't suitable went to the pigs, and we figured we got at least some of it later. And that has expanded to the point where we now have 21 pigs that we sell in whole and half. And most of our customers are repeat customers.
This portable range pen is a complete shift, in thinking in raising poultry from the confinement operation, and because you're distributing nutrients. I've never liked you have chickens in a house in a yard, and there's never anything growing in the chicken yard because they eat everything that comes up, and so there's no plants there to absorb their nutrients. And it's kind of like that's the problem with barnyards. And one of the jobs that an organic farmer has is to keep from concentrating nutrients on his own farm.
We raise bull calves, steers, and they spend their first year basically starting on milk replacer and hay and grain and a small amount of pasture. They spend the winter in our barn, which enables us to collect the manure, and then the following year they are rotated on about a 5-day schedule around the different spots on the farm. And that uses some of the grass that we aren't growing crops specifically on, and returns some nutrient to that part of the soil as well.
I get everything from shrimp. Some winters, if the shrimp season is good, I can get a lot of shrimp waste, and that's very good compostable material. And I've gotten sea cucumber waste. I applied for and received the state small compost permit thing, mostly so I could tell the bait dealers and people like that around here who haul fish and stuff, if they have a, because of DEP rule, they used to, if they had rotten fish in their truck, they'd back down the ocean and dump it, or dump it someplace, and now they get in terrible trouble if they do that kind of stuff. So I'm trying to give them a legal place to drive right up here and dump their stuff. What I do is take my own manure, haul it back here, and then mix it with whatever stuff that I happen to have hauled on that year, either other cow manure or fish waste. And it takes about a month with this machine to make pretty decent compost, because you turn it almost daily for the first week, and then I probably turned this compost at least 12 times.
Well, when we first came here, we were very much interested in helping to change agriculture toward a less pesticide dependent, and this was one of our major motivations. The more experienced we became, we realized the difficulties in this, and we did adopt almost immediately on coming here pesticide reduction practices that have since been coined as IPM, Integrated Pest Management. This involves close monitoring of the pests in the orchard and developing a threshold for economic damage. We have probably been able to raise this threshold by accepting a little more damage than may normally be done in a commercial orchard, because we sell direct to the public, and they are often willing. They're often willing to take the utility grade and the off grade that cannot be sold on the fresh market commercially.
We started with an IPM program. The extension started with IPM, and I think we were one of the first farms to participate in the sweet corn IPM about 15 years ago in 1985. So I think back then we were even thinking, why spray if you don't have to? Monitor the insect pressure out there, and if thresholds can be developed, then why not let there be a little bit of damage if you can apply fewer chemicals, both from the cost of the chemical, the amount of time that it takes, and exposure. Yes, we sustain damage sometimes because they don't know enough at a certain point. I'm thinking of the extension.
Well, 1 year the earworm showed up a couple weeks earlier, and they hadn't even had the trap set up.
Whoops.
We had one section that was over 90% infestation.
Whoops.
So.
But
we went and we cut the tops of all the ears off.
Yeah.
We put a sign up for our customers and said, here's the situation, and they bought it anyway.
One of the things that we do for pest control too is timing, and we have quite an emphasis on post-frost vegetables and root vegetables like radishes and the small white turnips and rutabaga. And by doing those late, we can avoid the root maggot because they've finished up their season, and there's still plenty of time to grow a crop or two from now, which is mid-August on. And also that helps with weed control. We use a lot of transplanting on rather than direct seeding, even though it'd be possible to direct seed lettuce and then cold crops to some degree. But we'll raise and pumpkins and squash earlier too. We'll raise them in the greenhouse up to transplantable size. Then they'll miss problems with flea beetles and the first of the striped cucumber beetles by being in and then coming out just at transplant, and also it helps with weed control at that point to be putting on a larger plant that can be more dominant.
Historically, the Colorado potato beetle has been the biggest pest for us, and we manage that This year we managed it through crop rotation alone. 3 out of 4 years we have fields that are adjacent to one another, and there's a higher pressure, and then in the 4th year we jump across the road, and then in that 5th year when we jump back across the road again, it usually takes a year for the potato bugs to catch up, and for the 3rd time in our rotation, meaning this year, 4 years ago, and 8 years ago, we did not need to apply any insecticide for potato bugs at all, because the pressure was not sufficient to cause economic harm.
The LELY cultivator, if you read the literature, is not supposed to be designed for corn. Because of the hook at the end of the tine, they will pull a little bit of corn. When I plant my corn, I always plant a 40,000 population, 40,000 plants per acre. And because I know when I'm cultivating, I'm going to run over a little bit of it, and I'm going to pull a little bit of it. And if I end up with, I know I end up at least with 36,000 plants per acre. And after driving through it 4 times, that's really not a bad percent. Last year I had a piece of corn, when everything else was weedy and kind of bad production, I had one piece of corn last fall that cut off 30 tons the acre. And I thought back to how I might have treated that piece differently. And I remembered that that one got cultivated 3 times. Basically, I planted the seed, and a week later I cultivated it before the weeds or the crop had emerged. And I cultivated it once a week until the corn got to be, I only cultivated it 4 times, but at the end of the month the corn was a knee high, and it was in 15-inch rows, so the canopies had closed, and it was shading the ground, and that inhibits further weed growth. And that was the end of my cultivation, and that was my 30-ton per acre piece.
Well, we handle the weeds in the potatoes with several different strategies. We start off flaming the potatoes when they're about 6 inches tall, soon after emergence, and that's primarily for potato beetle overwintering adults, but it also kills off all those little annuals that are coming through right then. And then about a week later or so, we go through with a finger weeder, which is a 1940s and 50s tool, probably came around even younger than that, that goes through the top inch of soil, and it's like a lily weeder, and it takes out those annuals again. It also takes some perennials. And then we clean up what needs to be cleaned up, which usually isn't very much, by walking the fields. But we do walk, and we get everything. Our fields are cleaner than, just as clean as anyone else's.
One of the most important things about weed control is don't get too big, because I know too many people who at this time of the year, when everything's ripe and they got to pick, they have to spend all their time harvesting, and their weeds go to seed. Well, that's just it. It's false economy, because next year you're in trouble. The old saying that 1 year of weeds is 7 years of seeds, I think is just about right.
An integrated system, as it would apply to our farm, starts with the fact that we have a long rotation. We have a 4-year rotation growing potatoes in 1 year out of 4. So every field will follow the year of potatoes with a field of grain, which is undersown with clover, and then the clover will grow that fall, and then the following year and 2 years. And then we go back to potatoes in the 5th year of the rotation. So a long rotation is the basis of our integration. The years of clover, we've got a small amount of livestock, and we're cutting what little bit of hay that we need here for ourselves, but for the most part we're bush hogging the clover at a young, immature stage to promote the biomass growth. And What we view our job is that the potatoes is the primary crop that we grow. It's the cash crop, and that our role is to try to generate the best possible soil conditions to grow the best quality crop of potatoes when that 4th year comes around. So the grain and the clovers are all part of the procedure for building the soil up so that we can grow a good quality potato crop.
We do plant hairy vetch and rye, and of course hairy vetch will provide a significant amount of nitrogen. But again, we've needed to spread out our rotation so I can consistently get a good stand of hairy vetch so that I can really count on getting that 100 pounds of N per acre that we really need to produce these crops. So I haven't been able to jump off into the chasm quite yet because I'm not confident that we've got those nutrients in place. We soil test every year so we can monitor all the parameters, all the micronutrients. So they look good. I think we're poised to make that leap. But I think that nitrogen component is the last step.
Our system has evolved over the years, particularly as we've learned how different crops grow. I was lucky to work on other farms before we moved to Maine, and I had a chance to go to school as well, and had a pretty good sense that a system based on rotations and green manures was doable, but was perhaps not really modeled very well at the time. So we really did a lot of trial and error work over the years. We tried different types of green manure crops. We've grown sweet clovers, we've grown annual alfalfas, we've done a lot of different kinds of grains. Basically, we've tried different things and tried to understand the biology of that particular crop and try and figure out how the timing of how that crop would grow could fit into our system. Do we have a window of opportunity after a certain vegetable is done in order to put in a green manure that could then be incorporated later and would help with either weed control or fertility management?
We start off with the field-grown perennial plants, and then at some point there's enough perennials out there we can start doing cut flowers with them. We don't have a heated greenhouse, so our annual flowers don't come in till late, but that's okay because by the time the perennial flowers are starting to peter out, our annuals later are coming in. We're just about done the perennial business around the time when the blueberries start, so there's not too much conflict there. And when we're done the blueberries, then we start to focus on making value-added products with the dried flowers, dried herbs, and with them we make different kinds of wreaths, and that brings us into November when we're making Christmas wreaths. And along with the Christmas wreaths, we make a bunch of twig wreaths too, which are mostly made out of terrible blueberry field weeds. The sweet fern is the major ingredient in those.
It's very important to have something new for the customers. They seem to always have changing desires, and the marketplace is a fluid and a dynamic thing. So we first planted a block of antique varieties, which we propagated from some of the old trees that were here, and we've also planted quite a few of the newer so-called designer apple varieties that have come along in the last 10 years or so. And so we have a whole spectrum of apples starting early in August and going right through the season till the end of October. Some of them are old-fashioned and have some of the old flavors, and others are new and have some of the new and exciting new flavors.
I think part of the important thing in a sustainable farm is a combination of practices that are going to sustain the land, to renew the land itself, but can also provide an economic benefit to the farmer as well. So the use of plastics, either as season extension or greenhouses, may not in itself seem to be a sustainable practice. We found that certain uses of plastics for us can help in terms of that economic benefit. They extend our season, which in Maine can be quite short, to enough of a not quite a year-round system for us yet, but we're marketing now from about the beginning of April until about the beginning of December. And some of the way we do that is by using commercially built plastic greenhouses. Ours are 17 by 96 foot in size. We start out in some of the houses with our salad greens to begin the season, and some of the houses go into tomato or colored pepper production. And those houses, as those crops have been harvested, they will be converted either from tomatoes to salad greens or vice versa, from salad greens into tomatoes. So it's one of the only areas of the farm where we're able really to get a full double cropping from the farm. We also use some homemade covers. They're a PVC pipe with a row cover over the top of them. It allows us to cover a 4-foot bed in width, and they're unheated kind of mini greenhouses that allow us to get certain of the summer crops like field-grown tomatoes and peppers into the ground a little bit earlier.
We have 3 houses, as you pointed out. 4 houses now, that's right. I forgot the one down in the field. One of those is a germinating house with the raised benches and under the bench heat, where we start most all of the seedlings that we need out in the field, as well as for the retail market. Jan grows a lot of flowers and bedding plants. What's that?
Comparatively small amount.
Well, comparatively small, but for our size operation, it's a fair amount. Then we have a transitional hoop house where we harden off the transplants before they go out into the field. And then we've got a 30 by 90 foot house that's solely planted to tomatoes. And so we get the early tomato market, where we can charge how much a pound?
$3.
$3 a pound. And that's worked out very well.
I have 7 actually called hoop houses. They're 14 foot by 100 foot, and I have 6 of them with tomatoes in them and 1 with cucumbers. And we can grow, get a tomato a lot earlier inside in a